Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Succession Management Best Practices for Nonprofits, Part 2, featuring Irene Cruz, Client Success Manager at Cornerstone OnDemand. This presentation will be the conclusion to a special two-part series focused upon succession management, something that many nonprofit leaders have acknowledged as a significant organizational weakness. Today's focus will be on defining effective succession management processes and identifying those metrics essential to ensuring that your succession process is a success. The Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation is excited to sponsor this presentation, and we thank you for attending. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To reduce background noise, all lines have been muted. Please note that there is a chat box located in the middle right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time, as we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today's session and the associated slides will be posted on the Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation website within 48 hours. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to these archives and information about the next webinar in this series. Please feel free to share this presentation with coworkers and friends. Now, before I hand it over to our presenter, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce myself and the Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation as the host of this presentation. My name is Justin Waddell, and I work with the Nonprofit Empowerment Program of the Foundation, which was launched in 2009 in an effort to provide learning and talent management technology and pro bono HR consulting services to the nonprofit sector, both domestically and abroad. Today's webinar, Succession Management Best Practices for Nonprofits, Part 2, is part of a nonprofit webinar series designed to provide expertise and best practices related to human capital for nonprofit leaders. This webinar is an extension of the HR Pro Bono Core, a CSOD Foundation initiative which provides HR-related coaching and consulting to nonprofit organizations at no cost. The HR Pro Bono Core focuses its support in 3 areas: performance management, learning management, and succession management. If you are interested in learning more about how your organization can benefit from the services provided through the HR Pro Bono Core, please visit our website at cornerstoneondemand.org. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Irene Cruz. Irene, thank you again for sharing your expertise today. I'll now pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. I am really excited to have the opportunity to talk to you today about succession management. I do want to take a moment to briefly introduce myself. My name is Irene Cruz. I am a Client Success Manager at Cornerstone OnDemand. I'm a learning and development practitioner, and my experience ranges from training, employee development, performance, employee engagement, and process improvement. And I've actually worked with various companies at different verticals, such as healthcare, home improvement, financial and business services, even national associations implement their talent management systems. And also a little trivia about me. I am located in Simi Valley, California, which is about 45 miles northwest of Los Angeles, but with traffic, it can be up to 2 hours one way. So let's get started. All right. So I wanted to start us off by discussing the key learning objectives for this two-part presentation. The purpose of these presentations is to establish a solid foundation for succession management and also dive in a little deeper to talk about the succession management process. The presentations include tools and metrics around owning a succession management process, and how to reevaluate your process over time to make sure that it's working for your organization. Succession management best practices are also discussed to ensure that your nonprofit has the tools and resources it needs to successfully identify and develop today's talent to be tomorrow's leaders. I highly encourage you to ask questions As Justin had previously mentioned, we do have a chat box located at the middle right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time, as we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. For those who had missed the first session last month, you can still access it by going to the Cornerstone OnDemand Foundation website, so cornerstoneondemand.org. In the first session, it was discussed that succession planning is a process to replace people. You know, something happened to create a vacancy, so people are replaced as a result. Succession management, on the other hand, is more than just replacing people. So you might think, why is it important to nonprofits? Well, nonprofits are not immune from the issues brought to bear by the impending baby boomer retirement. According to a 2011 study by Daring to Lead, 67% of today's nonprofit executives anticipate leaving their posts by 2016. That's over 2/3 of essential nonprofit leaders who will be departing from the sector within the next 3 years. What makes this statistic all the more glaring is the fact that a staggering 70% of nonprofits today do not have any formal plans or professional development in place for the succession of those leaders. Without an effective pipeline in place to identify and develop those who can serve as tomorrow's leaders, nonprofits are placing themselves in a circumstance that is altogether hazardous to their ability to affect long-term and sustainable impact. Nonprofits are competing for talent in the profit world. You need to be able to do more with less, as you are understaffed and underfunded. It's important to keep your talent and standardize to conquer change. Our last session also covered the succession management maturity model based on a study done by Burson and Associates called High Impact Succession Management. Burson has developed a 5-level succession management maturity model, which can help organizations identify where they're at today. Lastly, we also talked about governance. Who needs to be involved, as the who greatly impacts how long and what level you eventually reside after executing the process. It was discussed, how your senior executives or board members' commitments and engagement are the most crucial in achieving a successful succession management process. Again, for those who had missed the first session, you can still access it by going to cornerstoneondemand.org. For today's presentation, our key points will focus on succession management process. We will review what would a good model look like that will help ensure an effective succession management process. We will discuss succession management tools and metrics, and go over some common industry measurement tools. We will also discuss best practices, how to ensure your succession plans are adopted by leadership and key stakeholders. Where do you start, and also why is it important to get their buy-in? In addition, we will also cover measuring for success, which answers how do you know that your succession process works. Before I dive in, I do want to share one very important point with everyone. This is a session that we will be laying out a solid foundation to give you an understanding of what succession management is. I understand that you may have a lot of questions, as this can be very content heavy. So again, I encourage you at any point of the presentation, please add your questions to our chat window so we can discuss them during the Q&A. With that said, let's get started. There are many succession management processes out there. What I have in front of you is a process that has been developed by Burson and Associates. They are a leading research and advisory services firm in enterprise learning, talent management, and talent acquisition. So, with so many processes, out there, all of them actually boils down to these 6 processes. So these 6 are the end of it all. No matter what industry or how big the organization is, most of the events that are happening today would fall down into the 6-step process. So just keep that in mind. So these steps identified are really to help ensure a successful annual succession process. So let's talk about the components under each of these steps in the process. So first, articulate roles for succession management. In order to be successful, an organization needs to be able to articulate roles in the succession management process. Senior executives must be engaged, committed, and take ownership of the succession process. A strong board influence can also help to ensure succession happens and happens for the right reasons. Business unit executives need to identify and grow talent. A lot of times, they think they know what this is all about or what succession is all about, but they haven't really partnered with HR to know how to grow talent and how to move forward. With that said, there should be a strong HR presence to help with the tools. So your employees or members or participants need to know where they want to go and also focus on how to get there. Next, identify key and critical positions. So this can be done by grade and position. You do have critical positions today that impact your organization. You need to be able to determine how to identify what those critical positions are and focus on the source for those critical positions. The next thing to note is that what are the critical roles you need to fill in the future? You need to be also comparing the employees using tools and determining what the gaps are so you can close them. Lastly, it's also looking at the professional positions that would lead into management roles. Next, we have here assess high potential. So what is a high potential employee? A high potential employee is an employee who has been identified as having the potential, ability, and aspiration for successive leadership positions within the organization. These are your employees who would volunteer for more work, raise their hands for more training, or ask for more leadership guidance. Often, these are the ones provided with focused development as part of a succession plan and are also referred to as high posts, high potentials. They are a key component to their department or functional area as well, and they can move upward to management capacity, C-level potential, which is very important. This image is another study from Burson showing you the correlation between potential versus impact and where the high potential sits. You will notice the high performers on the graph, those indicated by blue arrows. And these high performers are actually more focused on the impact, but does not necessarily have the potential aspect, which separates the two. They are more focused at the task at hand and delivering what needs to be delivered at that certain point in time. On the other hand, there are certain criteria for high potentials, such as looking at their performance evaluations. You can take a look at the past ratings that they have received. Also, you can look at their willingness to take on more responsibility, wanting more work to contribute more to the overall objectives of the organization and not just focus on what needs to get done right now. In addition, you can also look at their work experience. Do these high potentials have work experience and want to gain more of that work experience? Next, we also have competency assessments, which you could also use to determine their current skill sets and what development opportunities there are. And then lastly, you can also look at their personal career aspirations. These high potentials want to succeed and, again, be able to contribute more to the overall objectives of the organization. Now, there is one important thing to note. Although we did include performance evaluations or performance reviews in here, those do not necessarily predict or define potential. So this is something we need to be aware of as we think about high potentials. So from here, let me pause and ask you, maybe you can reflect a little bit. Who are your high potentials within your organization? Do you know who those are? How do you determine who those high potentials are? Are you sure that those names that you have in mind right now are not just high performers? So these are questions, for you to think about and consider as you're going through your process. All right. So going back to our process here, we now turn to conducting a talent calibration session. So there are two kinds of calibration you need to be aware of. There's what we call talent calibrations, and this is where HR is highly involved in facilitating the process. There's going to be peer-to-peer comparisons. You're going to look at certain metrics, identify what is critical to the business, and then making sure you provide that targeted development plans along the way. In addition, we have performance calibrations, which are used during performance assessments. As I have mentioned before, performance does not necessarily define potential or determine potential. It is still used, but always just keep that in mind that it does not necessarily mean potential in the end. So you just need to be cautious on how you're using it along the way. So before we move ahead, I'd like to take a moment to understand what the benefits are of talent calibration. So why is it necessary? Well, talent calibrations is actually a very good way to create that cultural norms, and it also helps managers articulate the expected performance, and by those ratings were provided, managers can also get a different view of the workforce and better understand their teams and understand the current talent that they have. It allows for transparency and awareness of the organization's health of talent, even from other parts or other departments. It can also increase pipelines and create a longer list of potential successors. Lastly, it promotes performance standards where managers can assess their own performers against those in other departments. So at this time, I'd just like to give a quick reminder that we do have a chat box located at the middle right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time, as we will allow for a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Going back to our process here. Next, we've got implement talent review workshops. A talent review is a meeting in which business leaders discuss talent information. Often this is part of an overall succession management process. This is where everyone agrees who the high potential talent is. It also facilitates a collective understanding of the current bench strength or your current talent. And it also creates essential development plans for their talent. And then next, we've got define action plans. Action plans are the most important. If you don't put those fundamental principles in action, nothing will occur. All of your lists and the succession management exercise that you just went through really will not accomplish anything without defining what the next steps are. Executing on your plans will differentiate a succession planning process from a succession management process. So would you go through this entire process once a year and just have it sit on a shelf for the next 11 months? Or are you going to integrate it into your organization? One of the main points we brought up in the last session was about taking your time, doing what works for you, and growing to that point. Many of you may not even be ready for this stage yet, or to have a succession management process, and that's totally fine. Try to have a reach point to get to where you want, but just have the patience and constantly try to drive your current process so you can get there someday. A succession strategy comes together during talent review workshops, and at this time, all of the information that has been gathered and discussed throughout the year is analyzed by HR and business leaders, which then lead to the action plan. So this is where key decisions are made and action plans are defined and implemented. So you want to make sure that there's that implementation of the entire process afterwards. So you do not just go through the process and again, just let it sit on the shelf. So from the process, we then go into what tools are available to help with this process. So there are most commonly industry-wide tools for the succession management process for lower and executive level successions. First, we've got organization charts. So org charts are actually used to focus on providing a visual view for executive management. It is used in talent review discussions, so executives can see a broader view of the organization. It's usually used, in the organizational planning. Again, it actually gives you that overview and a really nice visual view. Another tool that is used are actually assessments. There are a lot of different types of assessment tools available for different purposes in the talent management arena. I've listed a few types on here that's used to measure employees. There could be assessments that actually look at behavior to actual competencies that would match their job positions. So behavior to job fit, to their skill gap, and sometimes even personality assessments. So personality assessments would be, it could be DISC assessments, Myers-Briggs, or people styles. Companies use assessment tools to gain insight into the current performance capabilities and future potential of leaders. Assessments can help determine if a leader's personality traits, fit in with the organization's needs. They offer insights into a leader that are collected from the perspective of peers, subordinates, supervisors, or even customers. These instruments are extremely effective for helping HR leaders sort through their data to find those who are likely best suited and skilled to handle promotions. These tools can also help identify which leaders have the DNA and desire to be future leaders. So again, some assessments that are available can be about behavior or competency assessments, 360, which will give you an overview of that employee. Is this person, it could be job fit, team fit, skill gap, so that their potential, leadership, and personality. Next, we also have a 9-box grid. 9-box grids are very popular, and this is where you can actually use to plot successors or positions to see where they're at. A 9-box grid is a matrix tool that is used to evaluate and plot a company's talent pool based on 2 factors, which most commonly are performance and potential. Mature companies use a 9-box grid to ensure that they are accurately calibrating talent across different business units for an apples-to-apples comparison. Although they may define the boxes differently, these firms typically categorize leaders on a scale of high, medium, and low performance and potential. So my recommendation, there are definitely a lot of tools available. Do your research, but at the same time, I also recommend identifying first what kind of data do you need, within your organization. What would make the most sense for your organization? And from there, do some research and then identify what your tool is going to be. One thing to note is if you are not planning on doing something about the data that you capture using these tools, then don't even consider going through the succession management process. It's very, very important to understand that you need to take action on what has been done. And these tools can be very powerful in identifying potentials, but again, the key is what are you going to do next? All right, so here are some metrics that you can use as criteria for determining successors. So there's definitely a lot that you can choose from, and it also depends on what your organization is looking for. So those that are bolded in here, such as work experience, assessments, willingness to move up or take on more responsibility, personal career aspirations, performance evaluations, potential, and readiness for successor role. These are the most commonly used metrics that organizations use for high potentials. But then again, there's definitely more metrics that you could use, and it's all based on what would make more sense and be more applicable to your organization. It takes time to get to a point where you feel your process is producing the outcomes that you want. Some organizations even take years to design a succession management process and really start to have that momentum. And here are some items for you to consider when you're asking the question, how can I get started? If I'm going through succession for the first time, where do I go? So first of all, again, so it takes time, definitely. So that's one thing that you want to consider. And then next, simplicity. It's not about having the most sophisticated calibration tools and process. Sometimes over-engineering your process can actually be a detriment. It's about the quality of the conversations that you're having. You want to have constant conversations, and these conversations will get better over time. Also, give your company what they can handle at a time. Allow your organizational readiness to drive the tools and processes. You want to keep them engaged and invested. Transparency of the process itself. Sometimes a lot of people in general, as well as organizations, are afraid of things that they don't understand. So you want to keep it transparent and be able to communicate why you are going through that process. You need to educate your managers and employees that you have a succession management in place, how it's used, what is it, and why you are doing it. Next, we've got drive execution through your leadership. Engage executives and managers in the process. It is very important, if they are engaged, if they invest the time, it will then get other people to talk about it. Hold managers accountable for identifying talent and executing development. Leaders are the drivers in the succession management process. HR is the enabler. At the same time, you want to make sure that there's clear and concise roles and responsibilities within the company or the organization. Who is going to do what? Are your leaders equipped enough with the tools that they need? Also, what does your roadmap look like? How are your leaders going to get from point A to point B? You want to make sure that that's already thought of and mapped out. And then next, differentiate between your high potentials and high performers. These integrate with your performance management process. You can have many high performers, but then again, that doesn't mean that those employees are your primary bench strength. High performance is only one piece of the puzzle. So if you are thinking about, where do I go from here if you do not have currently a succession management process, I would say think about these 4 things. Take your time, make it simple, engage your leaders, and always keep in mind the difference between high potential and high performance. So from here we go to succession management best practices. So this is actually from an analyst perspective. So we've summarized some of the best practices out there. So you might see some of these in other studies as well. So first, you need to have a process-driven succession management process wherein managers are delivering feedback, employees are engaged, and there's that ongoing process that everyone is involved in. The organization really needs to own that succession process. And again, it's not just an HR initiative, it's a company-wide initiative. Second, have a transparent process. You need to have clear communications, and this will ensure a successful process. Managers and employees will embrace the process, and they will work harder towards achieving it. Next, align capabilities to the business strategy. Executives are engaged, and they need to be talking about succession regularly. And that can be a very strategic way of promoting it. So succession is a project that is impacted by the talent that is executing. So you need to make sure to build that pipeline and put the right people in the right jobs. Next, ensure executive commitment and engagement. So not only should they be talking about it, but there should also be accountability. And executives should be following up with the action plan, which actually goes back to what we mentioned earlier. Don't just put the succession process on a shelf until next year. Ensure that there's follow-up and action. Next, implement succession at all levels. So succession, from the top to the bottom of the organization. And then also we've got create a culture of sharing knowledge and talent. So sharing that knowledge and talent with different departments eliminates silos and creates that transparent talent mobility. awareness of talent across each department across the organization. And talent reviews is actually a great way to do that. Yes, talent reviews is where managers and leaders get into a room and discuss their current talent. Next, integrate with talent management strategy and processes. If you haven't heard it yet, you will hear it now. Succession management is indeed interconnected with performance, competency, learning and development, and even recruiting. Then lastly, measure for success. Know what you want out of it. Know why do you want to move forward with this process. So we've got some statistics from Burson wherein it says only 38% of organizations are actually effective with their succession management process. A lot of organizations jump into succession management and then it ends there. They don't talk about it again. They only bring it up after 11 months. But it all comes down to really how do you measure success? How do you know the succession management process works? What are the strategic issues your organization is facing? What cultural challenges are occurring that you want to be tracked? So in front of you, on this slide, we've got different types of metrics, some of the reasons why organizations would move forward or initiate a succession management process. So number of successors for a critical or key positions, and readiness of successors are the top two reasons why organizations go into a succession management process. So my parting message for you are actually a series of questions. So we are at the end of our presentation, but these are the questions that I do want you to think about after our presentation, or even as you're going through or considering having a succession management process. First, what do you want out of it? Think about it for a minute. Are you able to invest time and effort in not just going through the process, but actually following it up with development and action plans? Can you carry it on out beyond just collecting the data you need and identifying your high potentials? Lastly, are you ready for it? So I appreciate everyone hanging on through all of that content, and I'm hoping you had some takeaways from today's session. So we're actually going to move forward with Q&A. Justin, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Irene. That was fantastic. So as Irene just mentioned, we are now going to begin our Q&A portion of today's webcast. As a reminder, all questions can be submitted through the chat box in the middle right-hand side of your screen. So anyone with any questions as we're going through this, please don't hesitate. Send them in to the host, and we will be sure to address them. Irene, I've already got a few that have come in. Let's start with this one. Irene, you mentioned earlier that there are succession management tools available. What tools or processes would you recommend for organizations looking to learn more about their talent for succession management purposes?
Sure, and that's a very, very good question. As I mentioned earlier, there are definitely a lot of tools available for you. And the top three that are most common that organizations would use are organizational charts, assessments, and 9-box grid. So these assessment tools, that you have available can range from, trying to measure behavior or to even probably creating your own assessments. So you can also create your own assessment based on what your organization is looking for. But one thing to note, these are indirect methods to learn about your talent. These tools would allow for you to gather information, but decisions are not made from these tools. The important thing is really knowing what to do with the data that you gather using these tools. And this is where talent calibration and talent reviews are conducted by leadership, really to evaluate talent and determine their growth opportunity within the organization. And this is usually where leaders would then make those decisions. It's in these meetings, not necessarily just using the tools by itself. Good question.
Great, thank you. Working off of that, we actually had a question come in related to talent calibration. The question is, Irene, you talked about conducting a talent calibration session and implementing a talent review workshop. Can you clarify the difference between these two things again?
Sure, absolutely. So both are actually part of the 6-step annual succession process. A talent calibration comes before the talent review. In a talent calibration, HR is usually involved, and it's actually meetings that bring managers together. Usually these are peers, to finalize ratings of all of their employees within their groups. During these meetings, employees' individual results are comprehensively calibrated against their peer group and evaluated on a defined criteria that can include performance relative to objectives, job scope delivery, or demonstration of leadership competencies. So these sessions really provide an opportunity for managers to agree on who should and should not be included in the talent review. Now, on the other hand, the talent review workshop, I can say, is really the heart of a succession management strategy. It's a very important step of the process. So the number of individuals and positions for which they are being considered have been narrowed down through the talent calibration process. In these meetings, senior business leaders agree on who is high potential talent. They create an understanding of the organizational bench strength, and they create assignments that put development plans into action. So the talent review workshop should produce action plans or next steps. It's a very good question, and sometimes a lot of organizations would confuse the two, but think about it. Talent calibration comes first, and then workshop, the focus of a calibration is to determine your current talent, wherein a talent review is for you to agree on who your high potentials are and also create an action plan from there.
Great, thank you. I have another question. Irene, one of the best practices you mentioned was having a transparent process. What does a transparent process mean exactly?
Sure. So having a transparent process is one of the best practices we have. And this is where you inform your employees or members of your organization that you are going through a succession management process. This is where you make them aware of it and to make sure that they understand that this is supported by upper management. Because succession management process, not a lot of organizations actually do have one in place, even at this time. So a lot of employees find this to be a relatively new concept. Increased transparency allows employees to create targeted development plans that will prepare them for future roles and increase the company's bench strength. It's difficult to prepare successors without directly engaging the employees, in their own development and also discussing their desire to move on into more senior roles. So really just having that open communication process, ensuring they know why you're going through a succession management process, what is it, and also making sure that upper management is supporting it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And we have one more question that's come in. Again, if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to put them through the chat function. Irene, the final question I have is, our organization is trying to put some rigor around how we move talent into and out of critical roles. Have organizations elsewhere developed any criteria for how they manage moves into and out of these types of roles?
Sure, it's another good question. So the identification and placement of talent into critical business roles are done through your succession management program. So the first step is in really identifying the critical roles. To do this, you must establish criteria. These types of criteria that companies use often include positions with the greatest business impact, positions with deep specialized skills, and those that are difficult to fill. Now, the second step that I recommend is evaluating your bench strength or the pipelines for these roles. Typically, these are your high potentials. So bench strength actually refers to the capabilities and readiness of potential successors to move them into key professional and leadership positions. So bench strength is critically important because organizations continuously go through turnover, restructuring, and changes, even in their business strategy. Next, you'll need to also consider how you are developing individuals in the pipeline to fill these positions. What types of development do you have in place? And as I've mentioned earlier in my presentation, development planning is a critical success factor for an effective succession management strategy. So there also needs to have that development planning afterwards, right? Next steps.
Okay, great. And that concludes all of our questions for now. Again, if you have a question that pops into your head at some point down the line, any one of our viewers right now, please don't hesitate to email myself at the foundation, and we'll be sure to address it. But that will conclude our Q&A. Now, as a reminder, today's slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Foundation website within 48 hours. We will also be sending all participants a follow-up email with a link to this location shortly. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation and for your wonderful questions, and a special thanks to Irene for a fantastic presentation. And this is kind of of course, this is kind of bittersweet, but this actually concludes the 2013 HR Pro Bono webinar series. We really appreciate the support from all of our viewers this past year, and we look forward to continuing to offer informative looks at effective talent management in 2014. Now, until then, you can find all of our past webinars in the Case Studies and Resources page of the Foundation website, which will be redirected to once this webinar session ends. Again, thank everyone so much, and we hope to speak with you again soon. Have a great day. Bye.